Have you ever considered that a flawlessly forged cob of solid silver, its every leaf shaped with a millimeter-perfect geometry, might be more than mere opulent temple ornamentation? That it is, in fact, a colossal, encrypted cosmic database, mapping the alignment of the dark dust clouds of the sky, the Yanafuyu of Incan astronomy, against the imposing peaks of the Andes. History, by its very nature, tends to overlook the somber and silent mathematics concealed behind polished surfaces. To the casual observer, that silver cob is merely a testament to the wealth of an era. Yet, to one standing at the rare, narrow intersection of metallurgy, botany, and archaeoastronomy, this object is nothing less than a materialized, solidified, and encoded map of the Milky Way galaxy, brought down to Earth. You are stepping precisely into the center of this intellectual gravity, into the ancient city of Cusco, battered by the unforgiving, freezing winds of the Andes, at an elevation of 3,400 meters above sea level. This is the capital of the Inca Empire, the absolute center of Tawantinsuyu, the intersection of the four corners of the world. Outside, there is a razor-sharp, whistling mountain tempest, where oxygen is remarkably scarce, a wind that scores the lungs like a fine layer of fractured crystal. The night has descended upon Cusco, like a heavy shroud from across the Urubamba Valley. As your footsteps advance across the volcanic, stone-paved courtyard, a path traversed by countless priests and emperors over the centuries, you detect the scent of dry ichu grass and high-altitude snow carried by the gale. Before you rises Coricancha, the temple of the sun, the most sacred domain of the Incan cosmos. Yet, your objective is not the vast exterior golden courtyards marveled at by Spanish chroniclers, nor the widely recognized temple chambers. Your trajectory leads much deeper into this colossal complex, extending toward the bedrock of the mountains, toward a seismic and thermal sanctuary whose existence was preserved solely within the memories of the highest-ranking high priests. Diverging from the temple's primary corridors, you enter a downward-sloping passageway woven from polished andesite blocks, a corridor that steadily narrows as the ambient light gradually wanes. As your fingers brush the walls, you feel the dry, mineral-laden coldness of the stone, an immutable chill that has endured for millennia. Suspended in the air is an incredibly subtle, sweet, and earthy aroma. The non-acrid soot of sacred Palo Santo wood, perhaps burned centuries ago. With every downward step you take, the tearing whistle of the exterior storm becomes increasingly muffled, yielding to a profound, heavy resonance born from the acoustic architecture of the passageway. At the terminus of the corridor, you encounter a colossal stone door, meticulously carved at the exact same angle as the natural texture of the wall, rendering it completely imperceptible to an untrained eye. This is no primitive mechanism reliant on iron hinges or wooden locks. It is a marvel of Incan engineering, wherein a diorite block weighing multiple tons is balanced through a flawless calculation of the center of gravity atop a spherical stone socket concealed within the floor. As you place your hands into the subtle, smooth indentation at the edge of the door and exert pressure, this monolithic mass begins to pivot on its axis with astonishing fluidity, emitting a deep, resonant friction. The low-frequency vibration of ancient stone grinding against stone permeates through the mechanism, traveling upward from your arms into your shoulders. You step across the threshold, and the moment you pass, that massive diorite block closes behind you with the same solemn precision, creating an almost vacuum-like seal. The sheer thickness and locking angles of the masonry have effectively banished the entire acoustic and thermal chaos of the outside world. The interior is deafeningly silent. The exterior tempest is now nothing more than a deeply suppressed bass vibration, a thick layer of brown noise that feels as though it emanates from the abyssal depths of an ocean. Within this concealed subterranean chamber, where time has been brought to an absolute standstill, the first element to strike your senses is the warm, organic, and grounded aroma of the woven wool textiles covering the floor from edge to edge, mingling with the scent of dry volcanic minerals. This is not a freezing tomb. On the contrary, there is an isolated and entirely externally sealed geothermal warmth. The sole source of illumination is a smokeless torch fire, flickering slowly within a copper sconce set into the corner of the wall. As your eyes adjust to this amber-hued obscurity, you notice that the fire's light is reflecting not off the stone walls, but from something situated precisely in the center of the chamber. Stepping onto the thick alpaca weaves covering the floor, you walk through the silence toward that immaculate secret, toward the initial silver glimmers of the unfading metallic garden that harbors the cartography of dark constellations within its leaves. You are entirely insulated, entirely secluded, standing at the very heart of history's most silent archive. The freezing, chaotic world you left behind, the heavy diorite door, is now merely a deeply reduced frequency, a brown noise echoing only in the furthest recesses of your mind. The immense kinetic energy, generated by the high-altitude winds striking the exterior walls, is entirely absorbed by the unique architecture of the chamber you now occupy, filtering inward only as a profoundly resonant bass vibration that makes the very volume of silence palpable. Within this absolute insulation, even the soft, slight friction of your footsteps across the alpaca-woven floor is instantly dampened by the acoustic engineering of the space. Although the light beckons you toward the silver glimmers at the center, your intellectual curiosity first directs you toward the source of this flawless isolation, the colossal stone walls shielding you from the external realm. You slowly turn your steps toward the perimeter of the chamber, moving toward the zenith of millennia-old Incan masonry, the legendary art of dry-laid stone construction. As you approach the wall, you realize that the material gleaming beneath the amber torchlight is no ordinary mass of rock. This is andesite, an incredibly dense and unyielding volcanic stone, forged by magmatic activity deep within the Andes millions of years ago. When your fingertips touch the surface of the stone, they perceive not only a cold mineral texture, but also the heavy, patient, and meditative craftsmanship required to achieve this smoothness in an era completely devoid of steel or iron. The Incan stone masons did not utilize metal chisels to shape these colossal andesite blocks. Instead, employing far harder river stones, quartz sand, and hematite dust, they created these immaculate surfaces through decades of relentless abrasion, grinding stone against stone. The slight chill upon the rock is, in truth, the crystallized, solidified memory of tens of thousands of hours of human labor and frictional force. Yet, as you focus your gaze upon the entirety of the wall, you observe that the true engineering genius lies not on the polished surfaces of the stones, but within the inconceivable relationship they establish with one another. There is no binding material here, no lime, no mud, no mortar. In stark contrast to the rigid and fragile mortar paradigm that sustains the massive cathedrals of Europe, Incan architecture was constructed with the profound epistemological awareness of its placement atop the Nazca Plate, one of the most active tectonic zones on Earth. Mortar does not yield during a seismic event. It fractures, precipitating the inevitable collapse of the structure. Conversely, the colossal polygonal stones your fingers now trace cling to one another, utilizing nothing but their own sheer mass and flawless mathematical angles. You draw an imaginary line with your eyes from the corner of one block to the next. You observe edges carved at 10, 12, or even 14 different angles. This asymmetrical and highly complex geometry is far from an aesthetic preference. It is entirely a mechanism for seismic attenuation. When a subterranean earthquake wave reaches the chamber, these polygonal blocks do not separate or shatter. Rather, owing to the microscopic tolerances between them, they slide ever so slightly against one another, absorbing the destructive kinetic energy of the seismic wave by converting it into frictional heat. Once the tremor subsides, guided by the immaculate calculation of their centers of gravity, each block returns precisely to its original configuration, much like a living organism. These walls were not designed to rigidly resist the convulsions of the earth, but to dance in harmonic resonance with those tremors and dissipate their energy. You glide your fingertips along the microscopic seam where two colossal andesite blocks converge. The junction between the two stones is locked at such a precise cellular level that it is physically impossible to insert even a single strand of alpaca hair, let alone a sheet of parchment. The secret behind the deafening, solemn silence of the chamber lies precisely within the molecular density of these joints. When the acoustic waves of the external wind strike this barrier, they find no voids through which to transmit their kinetic energy. Any minor acoustic vibration generated within the room strikes the varying angles and microscopic pores of the stone surfaces, fracturing and dampening instantly before it has any opportunity to reverberate. This is the absolute anechoic chamber of the ancient world. The architecture of the space functions as an acoustic sink, rejecting noise and harboring only the dignified stillness of thought and observation. As you slowly elevate your gaze from the base of the wall toward the ceiling, another subtle engineering detail saturates your mind. The walls do not ascend toward the sky at a perpendicular angle. Instead, they lean inward with a very slight, elegant inclination. This is the trapezoidal structure, the defining hallmark of Incan architectural geometry. This form, broad at the base and gradually narrowing toward the apex, is a stroke of static genius that harnesses the force of gravity, not to the detriment of the structure, but to its distinct advantage. The downward pressure from the ceiling and the upper blocks, weighing thousands of tons, does not force the walls outward. Rather, through this inward tilt, the structural vectors are directed squarely into the center of the stones. As time passes, as centuries roll on, and gravity continues its relentless work, these stones interlock with increasing density, rendering the chamber structurally more formidable with each passing epoch. While you touch the cold, smooth, and centuries-old surface of these volcanic stones, you are witnessing exactly how the chaotic forces of nature have been subdued by the pure geometry of the human intellect. This chamber is a silent, solemn, and eternal rebuttal to the external storm, to tectonic upheaval, and to the erosive power of time. However, the coldness of this mineral insulation, of these stone walls, is about to yield to the organic, tactile warmth slowly rising from the interior of the room. The floor beneath your feet, masking the harsh reality of the stone, waits to envelop you in soft textiles, the product of an entirely different engineering paradigm, a masterpiece of thermodynamic elegance. Slowly, withdrawing your fingertips from those cold, immaculate andesite blocks that serve as a seismic shield, you redirect your focus to the other primary element, generating the deafening silence of the chamber, the dense, layered textiles that blanket the floor from edge to edge. Within this subterranean vault at the heart of the mountains, the unforgiving mineral reality of the stone yields to an entirely different engineering paradigm, a thermodynamic elegance, wherein biology, chemistry, and advanced mathematics are woven together, thread by thread. As you advance very slowly toward the center, illuminated by the amber torchlight, You feel the ground beneath the soles of your feet morph from unyielding rock into an organic sea that absorbs your weight, swallows your steps, and responds with a dense, resonant textile friction. Kneeling and resting your palms upon these colossal, heavy mantles, you encounter the physical manifestation of that absolute sense of security you feel in history's most isolated domain, the centuries-old warmth of pure alpaca wool. These weaves are not mere floor coverings or decorative instruments of luxury. They represent a cellular-level survival technology developed against the lethal Andean ecosystem at an altitude of 4,000 meters, where oxygen is scarce and nocturnal temperatures plummet far below freezing. As you press your hand into that dense layer of wool, you begin to perceive, on a microscopic scale, just how profoundly alpaca fiber differs from ordinary animal hair. Carefully selected by Incan weavers, these premium Huacaya and Suri alpaca fibers possess a hollow tubular structure containing microscopic air pockets, or medullae, at their core. This cavernous luminal architecture blocks the freezing external air while trapping thermal energy at a cellular level. The subtle geothermal heat radiating within the chamber, along with the warmth emanating from your own body, permeates these microscopic air chambers and is irrevocably retained. As you slowly drag your hand across the dense fabric, you hear the profound, resonant, brush-like rustle produced by the friction of the woolen threads, and you feel yourself sinking into a thermal shield forged millennia ago. Yet, these mantles push the boundaries of intellect not only through their insulative properties, but also through the immense chemical complexity they harbor. Beneath the dim torchlight, you examine how the colors upon the thick blankets have remained so vibrant and solemn despite the destructive influence of time. That deep, saturated, and hypnotic red penetrating the depths of the fabric is not derived from a simple root dye. It is the culmination of a unique biochemical reaction harvested from the female carapaces of microscopic cochineal, Dactylopius coccus, insects, parasites dwelling upon the cacti of the Andean flora. Incan chemists extracted the carminic acid by drying and crushing these insects, and to ensure this pigment would permanently bond to the fabric, they boiled it with mordanting minerals, such as the aluminum potassium sulfate obtained from volcanic regions. Touching the fabric, you observe how this deep crimson is locked at a molecular level with the keratin protein of the wool, how it absorbs the light and reflects it back into the chamber as a heavy, blood-red obscurity. Stretching directly beside the crimson, the abyssal, pitch-black blue tones resembling a deep chasm were created through a complex oxidation process of indigotin, extracted from the leaves of the indigofera plant. You visualize how these threads were woven on colossal backstrap looms under months of alternating tension and release cycles. The rhythmic, monotonous geometry, created as the warp and weft threads pass over and under one another, has formed a millimeter-perfect mathematical grid upon the surface of the textile. When you lightly compress the fabric between your fingers, you feel the monolithic elasticity forged by tens of thousands of stitches, and the silent yet intense physical resistance the threads exert as they interlock. But the element that truly lulls your mind into a profound intellectual exhaustion is neither the chemistry of the wool nor its warmth. Rather, it is the immaculate, monotonous, and mesmerizing geometric order formed by these colors and threads, the Tocapu motifs. Your eyes begin to wander across the boundless square matrices woven into the blanket. Each Tocapu square is a self-contained mathematical universe, harboring stepped crosses, the chicana, checkerboard patterns, opposing triangles, and concentric rhombuses. These patterns are not mere ornamentation. They function as a woven binary code system, an algorithmic tapestry where weavers memorize thread counts, color shifts, and knotting sequences to narrate the history of the empire and the status of its nobility. As your gaze glides from one of these squares to the next, you witness the exact same geometric rule repeating infinitely, without a single deviation. This immutable arrangement of vertical and horizontal lines embeds itself into your consciousness with fractal perfection. The visual rhythm generated by these mathematical repetitions beats against the information processing centers of your brain like a heavy, rhythmic wave. As you attempt to decipher the symmetry of each stepped motif, the sequential alternation of each indigo and carmine square, your mind begins to numb exquisitely within this solemn monotony. Standing within the chamber, accompanied by the warm scent of root dye and dry wool radiating from this centuries-old textile sea beneath your feet, entirely isolated from the cold, noise, and chaos of the outside world, you surrender yourself to the embrace of that colossal mathematical order and thermodynamic insulation, pausing at this threshold where the unshakable stillness of stone merges with the deep, tactile warmth of wool. Your eyes inevitably drift toward the singular and ultimate focal point at the center of the room, the alchemy of that unfading, immaculate metallic garden where the torchlight shatters and trembles, shaped by the wind, holding the cipher of the dark constellations. As you continue to advance your steps across the dense, thermodynamic shield of the alpaca, weaves toward the absolute center of the chamber, your eyes slowly lock onto the definitive focal point where the amber torchlight refracts. The seismic stillness of the walls and the solemn, tactile warmth of the floor now yield to an entirely different engineering paradigm that defies the limits of comprehension. An alchemy wherein organic life is frozen and immortalized through inorganic, eternal minerals. Within the obscurity stretches a colossal cornfield forged of solid silver and gold, rendered in its exact biological dimensions. Its leaves, cobs, and even its tassels indistinguishable from their flawless anatomical counterparts in nature. Standing immediately adjacent are golden llamas with their heads bowed, every detail of their fleece meticulously sculpted, resting upon a terrain blanketed by fine metallic grasses. This is the subterranean, immortalized replication of Coricancha's legendary solar garden, entirely insulated from time, decay, and biological mortality. Standing before this metallic flora, your mind attempts to deconstruct not merely its blinding aesthetic, but the arduous, exhaustive metallurgical process required to liquefy these minerals at freezing altitudes where atmospheric oxygen is far too sparse to sustain combustion. The Incan artisans did not employ subterranean bellows to smelt their gold and silver. Instead, they domesticated the unforgiving gales of the Andes. The raw material for these immaculate silver cobs gleaming before your eyes was purified within cylindrical clay kilns known as huayrachinas, situated upon the highest ridges of the mountains, perched on precipices subjected to the most violent winds. As night fell, the fierce katabatic winds blowing upward from the valley penetrated the aerodynamically calculated apertures of these kilns, functioning as a colossal, natural bellows to fuel the charcoal fires within. Gazing upon these smooth silver surfaces now, you are essentially observing how that ferocious fire, exceeding 1,000 degrees, was stoked by the kinetic force of the wind and the slow, hypnotic phase transition of the silver ore as it flowed into crucibles as a dense, viscous liquid. The crystallization process, endured by the molten alloy as it gradually cooled, constituted the initial and most chaotic stage of the eternal form standing before you today. Yet, the cooling of the liquid metal into solid ingots was merely the genesis of the cellular engineering inherent in the creation of this garden. As you slowly extend your hand to examine the outward curving leaf of a golden cornstalk towering above you from a millimeter's distance, you realize that this flawless anatomy was not achieved through casting into molds, but through the mind-bending patience demanded by repoussé and cold forging techniques. To ensure the cooled gold and silver sheets retained their malleability and did not succumb to structural embrittlement, Incan master smiths subjected them to repeated annealing in the fire, subsequently beating them from the reverse side for hours, days, and months with bone and bronze chisels to generate this three-dimensional volume. Beneath the light, you observe how the natural vascular pathways upon the leaf were intricately depressed into the obverse surface of the metal through miniature hammering processes known as chasing. The microscopic hammer striations, barely discernible upon the metal's surface, are nothing less than the rhythmic, ceaseless echoes of human physical exertion and profound mental concentration, permanently engraved into the mineral, while you scrutinize these static objects, entirely detached from biological time. The minutely trembling flame of the solitary torch in the chamber casts a fluid, viscous play of light across the gold and silver surfaces. These optical refractions conjure a slowly pulsating, organic illusion over the unyielding, rigid metals. The amber reflections gliding across the smooth spines of the golden llamas dissolve the physical mass of the metals within your mind. The perception of time slowly unravels, dilates, and ultimately disintegrates within these rhythmic, undulating waves of light. There is neither past nor future. There exists only the absolute, immutable, and radiant present, locked within this sealed chamber. And in that precise moment, within this solemn stillness, an elusive physical reaction transpires. A microscopic thermal updraft rising from the torch in the corner of the room generates an exceedingly faint atmospheric circulation, reaching the metallic garden at the center. This invisible, infinitesimally weak air mass displaces a micron-thin silver leaf upon one of the corn cobs by a mere fraction of a millimeter. The silver leaf makes contact with the adjacent solid gold stalk so lightly, with such profound elegance, that this touch manifests not as a collision, but as a molecular salutation between two noble elements. The ensuing acoustic emission is the purest, most unblemished resonance of the metal. A deep, profoundly resonant, yet equally crystalline chime. The immaculate reverberation of an aeolian bell, filtered through the densest elements of the earth. This elegant vibration hangs suspended in the air for a fraction of a second. It attempts to propagate in waves through the void of the chamber, but is instantaneously absorbed by the unparalleled insulation of the enclosing seismic andesite blocks and the thick alpaca wool brimming with microscopic air pockets. The sound is hushed softly within the acoustic void of the room in its purest, nascent state, long before it has the opportunity to echo or multiply against the walls. What remains is a silence far deeper, far heavier, and more absolute than before. The silence of the mineral whispering its own existence before returning to its eternal stasis. The delicate, immaculate resonance born of that momentary molecular contact between the silver leaf and the solid gold stalk, a sound instantaneously extinguished within the absolute, anechoic void of the andesite walls, serves to subtly untether your consciousness from the strictly physical architecture of the chamber. It propels your mind away from the thermodynamic textiles and the seismic masonry, steering your intellectual focus toward the periphery of a vastly more profound, abstract, and celestial paradigm. Your eyes lock onto that singular, flawless cob of silver, drawn to the exact epicenter of the intellectual cipher that dictates the very existence of this subterranean sanctuary. In the amber obscurity of the fading torchlight, You notice microscopic incisions upon the outward curving leaves of the silver corn, markings that might initially masquerade as the random, errant striations of a mortal artisan's chisel, yet, upon closer inspection, reveal themselves to be executed with an exacting, millimeter-perfect, algorithmic discipline. To interpret this masterpiece of Incan metallurgy merely as an exquisite botanical replica is to remain entirely blind to one of the most formidable archaeoastronomical ciphers of antiquity. Because those asymmetrical demarcations, which your fingertips now trace with an imperceptible lightness, and the highly specific geometric angles at which the metallic leaves diverge from their central stem, are not the vascular pathways of a terrestrial plant. They are the sky itself. They represent the boundless, galactic atlas that descends upon the imposing peaks of the Andes every night, meticulously transferred, encoded, and literally hammered into the eternal surface of the metal. The Incan astronomical paradigm relies not upon the Hellenistic tradition of connecting luminous points of starlight through linear mathematics to form recognizable shapes. Rather, it is anchored in a far more profound, philosophical observation of negative space. For the high priests of Coricancha, the true narrative of the cosmos was concealed not within the burning starlight, but within the colossal, pitch-black voids between the stars, the dense, interstellar dust clouds that obscure the galactic core. As you lean closer, allowing your vision to synchronize with the microscopic topography of the silver leaf, you comprehend that these deliberate scratches actually delineate Mayu, the celestial river known to the modern world as the Milky Way, and more importantly, the Yana Fuyu, the dark constellations residing within its depths. The microscopic voids and textural variations between the silver granules are flawless, negative space reflections of the heavens. Yakana, the great dark llama whose celestial silhouette stretches across the galactic rift. Yutu, the partridge. Hanpatu, the toad. And Atok, the fox pursuing the llama through the cosmic river. The Incan astronomers encoded the chaotic, infinite, and overwhelming blackness of the nocturnal firmament into the microscopic shadows forged upon these silver leaves via the grueling repoussé technique. They mapped the unlit universe by capturing the shadows where the torchlight specifically fails to illuminate the metallic indentations. At this specific spatial coordinate within the chamber, surrounded by the silent testament of an empire's genius, the sheer epistemological gravity of this revelation descends upon your shoulders as an unparalleled intellectual saturation. You finally comprehend that these colossal, mortarless volcanic walls and the thermodynamic ocean of alpaca wool beneath your feet were not engineered merely to safeguard precious metals from the avarice of men. This chamber, insulated from the destructive forces of the external world, is a three-dimensional astrolabe. It is a subterranean planetarium where the entirety of the cosmos has been placed under a permanent geological lock and key. You realize that even if the exterior mountains were to fracture under tectonic pressure, even if empires were to collapse into historical dust, and even if the relentless, erosive winds of time were to scour the surface of the earth bare, the precise mathematics of the heavens, the eternal order of the stars and the dark clouds would remain in a state of absolute preservation within this seismic silence. The knowledge of the universe has been anchored securely within the bedrock of the planet. This crushing cosmic gravity of accumulated knowledge gently and methodically decelerates all of your analytical impulses, your lingering questions, and your cognitive compulsion to dissect your surroundings. Thoughts, much like a heavy, molten alloy, slowly cooling and crystallizing into a static matrix, begin to settle and tranquilize under their own immense conceptual density. The linear, conventional progression of time is no longer a valid metric within this vault. The howling, predatory Andean storm, raging just beyond the stone exterior, a tempest that tears at the mountain peaks, is now nothing more than a profoundly deep, rhythmic and muffled bass frequency, filtering through the colossal mass of the volcanic rock. It mimics a deep oceanic current, immutable, perpetual, and overwhelmingly monotonous. The singular torch fire in the corner of the room, having consumed the last of its atmospheric allowance, begins to shrink. That brilliant amber illumination gradually yields to a heavy, thick darkness, perfectly mirroring the celestial darkness, meticulously carved upon the silver leaves. The microscopic, infrequent crackles of the oxidizing wick become the only discernible events in the room, spacing themselves further and further apart. Thoughts truncate. The internal monologue dissolves into silence. There is only the unyielding immutability of the andesite stone, the heavy, thermodynamic embrace of the woven wool, the silent, eternal mathematics of the silver. And then, from the absolute depths of the chamber, an imperceptible thermal current slips once more between the gold and the silver. A solitary, impossibly faint metallic chime, a pure, flawless vibration, followed immediately by the absolute consuming silence of the stone that swallows it whole. The sensory field slowly recedes. The dignified, scholarly darkness of the chamber acts as a heavy shroud, covering the ancient secret of the stars. The deep, brown resonance of the wind remains entirely on the periphery, infinitely distant, fading into an eternal, intellectual stasis.